In the first part of this series on the coming Eurasian world, we made clear just how bankrupt the system of globalization really is, not only from a financial standpoint, but from a physical economic standpoint. The lack of physical infrastructure, basic economic infrastructure, means that currently billions of people around the world are totally the prey of the wild forces of nature, and many millions are on the verge of dying because of this. Now, you'd have to hate human beings quite a lot to call this system a success, or wish its furtherance. Now, we know that the environmentalists who say that man should not engage in changing the world, that he is responsible for destroying the planet, they would like to stop development in its tracks. But not only that, by them attempting to do so, they're sabotaging the economic process, the productive forces of labor decrease, and we see now that billions of people are unable to maintain their living standards. Now, how do we deal with this? We deal with this by reasserting what the role of physical infrastructure in society actually is. Taking it from the top, thinking, what do we need to maintain over a long period of time, several generations, the productive process as a whole worldwide to sustain 7 billion, 12 billion, 20 billion people to come and beyond. Now, what do things like the increase of energy flux density play as a role in this kind of process? These are the questions that need to be posed. And we know that simply building something isn't a criteria for infrastructure. Just think how many nations have been thrown into debt slavery by the IMF by way of building a dam or a motorway in the middle of nowhere, having no impact on the increase of productivity in that society, but merely incurring a huge monetary debt, which then disabled that nation from developing any further. And we should really think to ourselves, was there actually any point in history where mankind did not use his discoveries of principle, his creativity, to increase and to employ these in technology? Was this ever not done? And I think you'll see, if you look over the entire history of humanity, that was not the case. Now, we as an organization, the Schiller Institute, look back on a history of 30 years of fighting for worldwide economic development. And it was always led under the motto of peace through development. And the idea that every human being has innate human rights, has inalienable rights, which nobody can take away from them, and that economic development is the most obvious one that secures somebody's material survival and allows them to use their creative faculties. We've shown what, on other videos on this website, what something like NWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance, where you take a continental approach to economic development, to infrastructure development, that you look at how does man change the biosphere, how does man influence and re-engineer the different flows of elements, and how does this increase our advantage, our ability to survive on this planet over the long term. And these kinds of projects are exactly the things that the oligarchy and the bankers who are trying to hold on to power of this collapsing system fear the most. But we know that if we get over this bankrupt financial system, reorganize the system, and re-establish sovereign credit of nations which are acting in the interests of their people, we can do this, and we can expand beyond the planet. We can, by going to the moon, industrializing the moon, colonizing Mars, we can expand the biosphere beyond this planet. And indeed, that is something that is a real mission for mankind, and would bring mankind together under a common aim. And in the future, when future generations look back on the current state of society as it is now, they'll see that the way we behave now, and things like monetary systems and backward things like empires, were childhood illnesses, and they always pass. And that is what this part in the series of The Coming Eurasian World is all about. The face of the Earth, its image in the cosmos as seen from outside, from the depths of infinite celestial space seems to us absolutely unique, inimitable, and distinct from all other heavenly bodies. The face of the Earth exhibits the surface of our planet, its biosphere, its outer domain separating it from its cosmic surroundings. Once upon a time, about 4.5 billion years ago, our Sun was a young, very lonely, fast-spinning sun which spun off some material, a plasma, from itself. This plasma formed a plane around the Sun, organized in a coherent way through a polarized fusion process, creating the elements of the Mendeleev table and creating the orbital pathways of the planets of the Sun's solar system. On the planet we currently call home, the Earth, life slowly started to emerge. The earliest life forms were single-celled organisms with a simple internal structure. In these days, the Earth's atmosphere consisted mostly of the mixture of gases similar to what we know from volcanic activity, somewhat unfriendly conditions by today's standards. Such factors as the solar system's path through the galaxy and the Earth's changing orbit in the solar system gave rise to great changes in climate, such as a tremendous global warming and global cooling. 800 million years ago, the planet was frigid, and glaciers reached as far as the equator. During the following hundreds of million years, there were great changes in temperature, geography, and ocean currents. Continents broke apart and reformed. Higher forms of life developed, simple animals which developed nervous systems and brains. Plant life developed and spread onto land, as did animals. The land-based plants expanded and the activity of chlorophyll, creating an ever greater circulation of oxygen and water. This process, called photosynthesis, created an oxygen-rich atmosphere, which in turn created the protective ozone layer, allowing for the further evolution of life on Earth. Thus, life did not develop out of a chaotic heap of random local events. Rather, life shows everywhere an intention, a guided capability to sort unorganized chemical elements into concentrated forms and to thereby bring about an increase in density of energy. Although the totality of living matter exists in a minute layer of the troposphere over the entire surface of the planet, and although it comprises but a tiny part of the Earth's mass, life is a powerful geological force. The development of the biosphere towards ever more complex organisms finally created the conditions of an even higher form of life, a unique species that is able to discover the active principles of the universe willfully and consciously, a species that is itself able to harness and employ the anti-entropic powers of these processes, cognitive mankind. The pioneer in this field of scientific investigation was the Russian-Ukrainian Vladimir Vernadsky, who discerned 3 separate but interactive domains of different energetic material quality: the non-living, called the lithosphere, the living, the biosphere, and that of creative mankind, called the noosphere. The historical process is being radically changed under our very eyes. For the first time in the history of mankind, the interests of the masses on the one hand, and the free thought of individuals on the other, determine the course of life of mankind, and provide standards for mere ideas of justice. Mankind taken as a whole is becoming a mighty geological force. There arises the problem of the reconstruction of the biosphere in the interests of freely thinking humanity as a single totality. This new state of the biosphere, which we approach without our noticing, is the noosphere. Chemically, the face of our planet, the biosphere, is being sharply changed by man, consciously, and even more so, unconsciously. The aerial envelope of the land as well as its natural waters are changed both physically and chemically by man. American economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche, who has an unmatched record of successful long-term economic forecasts, has further developed the science of physical economy.
The issue, of course, the practical issue from an economic standpoint, is that there is no such thing as a fixed environmental standard. That is, mankind cannot stand still at any level of development, because in just continuing to function, we use up certain concentrations of raw materials which we require for our existence. And population grows too. What is needed is to improve the environment. I refer to this as platforms. For example, a great development of civilization started with the ocean travel, where people were navigating by the stars in transoceanic regions. Then we get to the point where we developed the riparian system, as was done by Charlemagne in Europe, which the great system of canals and rivers being connected together. Another platform, a higher platform than just the oceanic, the maritime culture. Then we went from river systems into railway systems. We extended these into the idea of continental railway systems. We're now talking about intercontinental railway systems, such as that of the Bering Straits Tunnel, which is now on the agenda again. And these kinds of programs, which lead to man's improvement of the role of life on the planet and beyond into work in space, these are the great projects and demand a fresh view of what progress really means, what we have to do to satisfy and secure mankind's well-being in the time to come. And these are the kinds of things that are on my mind and which I like to discuss, because these are great projects which, at my age, fascinate me.
The idea of a world land bridge first arose 20 years ago. When the Berlin Wall fell, Helga Zepp-LaRouche was the only political figure in Germany prepared for it. As Lyndon LaRouche had forecast the collapse of the Comecon bloc and had declared in October of 1988 that the reunification of Germany was an immediate prospect, both LaRouches were clear on the fact that a new order of peace based on mutual economic development of the East and the West would become possible. When the peaceful revolution of 1989 had successfully brought down the wall, Zepp-LaRouche declared that an unmatched, sublime hour of mankind had struck. While the Western European governments were surprised and without contingency plans of action, already in January of 1990 the Schiller Institute published a pamphlet entitled The Productive Triangle Paris-Berlin-Vienna, Locomotive for the World Economy. Zepp-LaRouche sent German Federal Chancellor Helmut Kohl an in-depth study of this proposal, along with a personal letter in which she wrote, "I would like to call the accompanying report to your attention. It contains a proposal for a comprehensive European infrastructure program as the precondition for the economic development of Eastern Europe. This concept was designed based on a proposal by my husband, Lyndon LaRouche, the fundamental idea of which is that only such an economic development program which includes cooperation with the economically desperate Soviet Union can be an effective policy for maintaining peace." Several ministries of Western Germany sent replies upon having received the report, expressing their appreciation and promising to evaluate the program. Mrs. Zepp-LaRouche provided leadership in spreading the optimism of economic reconstruction into all areas of society in Eastern and Western Germany and putting it on the agenda for realization. Great enthusiasm was displayed for the program by Mittelstand firms, chambers of commerce and chambers of industry, as well as entrepreneurs on trade fairs. However, they said, the state must get involved. Unfortunately, coal caved in under immense pressure from French President François Mitterrand and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher by agreeing to relinquish the hard German currency, the Deutschmark, in favor of the euro. He did this in return for their agreement to the reunification of Germany, as they had threatened to block in no uncertain language. The pressure grew to excruciating levels as establishment figures who were acting to develop both East German and Eastern European industry, such as Deutsche Bank CEO Alfred Herrhausen and trust agency head Detlef Rohwedder, were assassinated. These murders remain officially unsolved to this day. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Schiller Institute, through the leadership of Helga Zepp-LaRouche, expanded its development program eastward. Thus was created the Eurasian Land Bridge. Over the following years, she organized hundreds of conferences worldwide and workgroups which brought together high-level participants from all continents, and especially from the nations of the Strategic Four-Power Alliance comprising the United States, Russia, China, and India. Just to name a few, shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany, the Schiller Institute organized a conference in Berlin with the participation of leading Russian scientists. In 1996, Helga Zepp-LaRouche spoke at a major conference on the subject of the Eurasian Land Bridge in China. Shortly after the groundbreaking Schiller Institute conference in Bad Schwalbach in May 2003, the first international conference after the beginning of the Iraq War, Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche were invited to speak at a conference in Bangalore, India. In April 2007, a paper by Lyndon LaRouche was presented at a high-level conference in Moscow entitled Mega Projects of Russia's East, a transcontinental Eurasia-America transport link via the Bering Strait. And later, in September of the same year, the Schiller Institute assembled 350 international guests, among them an impressive delegation of Russian scholars and political leaders, to discuss the solutions to the global crisis under the headline, "The Eurasian Land Bridge Becomes a Reality." And already in February of 2009, more than 350 guests from 25 nations came together for a lively dialogue on the greatest crisis facing mankind: how to reconstruct the world now. What you are about to view are the projects that will reverse the economic collapse. That is, if they are implemented. And that will only happen if you commit yourself to do your part in shaping the future. Listen carefully while some of the world's leading experts present these great projects. Sky Shields is a leading member of the Basement Team, which works in close collaboration with Lyndon LaRouche on the unsolved fundamental problems of physical space-time, unified field theory, and cosmic radiation. Sky is the author of several scientific reports on physical economics, epistemology, and space research, and he has spoken at several international conferences on these subjects.
NWAPA stands for the North American Water and Power Alliance. This is a collaborative project between the nations of Canada, the United States, and Mexico around developing the region known as the Great American Desert, which is shared between the U.S. and Mexico, greening this area, making it fertile, but doing this by bringing large quantities of water down from Alaska, water that would normally be lost as runoff water into the Arctic, and bring this runoff water instead down through the continent through a system of tunnels, dams, canals, etc., transforming the entire route along the way, and creating massive amounts of hydroelectric power for Canada, but in our updated proposal also producing massive amounts of clean and potent energy-dense nuclear energy all along the route, building new cities, new rail developments, etc. On the face of it, NWAPA is a project for greening the Great American Desert. That by itself is huge, bringing agriculture into these regions, into the southwestern parts of the United States, into the northern parts of Mexico, that are right now represent a completely unusable area. Instead of filling these areas with solar panels and leaving them deserts, and in fact making the situation worse by planting these hideous fields of solar panel energy generation, instead of that, to actually green these deserts and bring them to life, that by itself is huge. You're creating new agricultural activity. You're changing the climate. You're changing whole weather patterns in a really amazing way. But then the more significant, that alone will have a huge impact on the U.S. and Mexico. But more significantly, though, the work done along the entire route will have a number of other effects. Just the mobilization, the scale of economic mobilization that's required to complete NWAPA means reviving U.S. steel production, reviving U.S. manufacturing, being able to produce the rail that we need, being able to produce the types of power plants, nuclear power plants that we need, being able to build the dams, the cement production, everything that's involved in that, and then the mobilization of our engineering force. This is by itself, that's enormous. The economic effects of that are enormous. What will happen in Canada, what will happen in Mexico, in order to move this thing is huge. This is something that's, comparable, that should remind you of what was done around things like the Apollo project.
In total, NWAPA is designed to transfer 1/5 of the rainfall runoff from Alaska and the Yukon Territory and collect a total of 5.4 trillion cubic meters of water. 7 dams and power plants would generate 23 gigawatts of electrical power from the water pressure. In all, 88 billion cubic meters of water would be brought into 7 states in the USA and 5 states in Mexico every year.
Think about what it means to have the entirety of the state of Alaska developed economically. Look at the scale of what's required in the dam building and the rail building, the power generation in Alaska alone. Suddenly you've got an infrastructure base there to do all kinds of things. I mean, not to mention the kind of the access you've got now to research facilities and other things, to building new research centers in the Arctic. But you've set yourself up for building either a bridge or a tunnel, a bridge across or a tunnel under the Bering Strait.
With the very initiation of NWAPA in North America, politically and economically, the land connecting the continents of America and Eurasia is placed on the agenda. The connection via the Bering Strait, a project that was proposed in the middle of the 19th century, would lead highways and rail track through a tunnel underneath the icy ocean waters and would include a gas pipeline as well as power transmission and communications lines. Construction of the Bering Strait Tunnel is an active agenda of many of the most important nations in that region.
Now, with a bridge or tunnel across the Bering Strait, suddenly that rail route that goes up to Alaska means something else entirely. Suddenly, if you talk about continuing that rail into what Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche have been calling for as the Eurasian land bridge, you're talking about connecting rail all the way from South Africa up through the continent of Africa, up through Central Asia, through Asia, Russia, across the Bering Strait, down through North America, down through South America, once we've solved the problem of crossing the Darien Gap, all the way down to the southern tip of Argentina. So suddenly, all these cities that were once the middle of absolute nowhere become the centers of human culture.
I'm going to talk today about the Bering Strait Tunnel project.
One of the international specialists on planning and constructing infrastructure projects of this scale and kind is Dr. Hal Cooper. Dr. Cooper has inspired and performed extensive feasibility studies on the rail and tunnel project for the Bering Strait, the rail connections within Alaska and Canada, as well as in numerous further projects.
Well, the Bering Strait Tunnel really is the physical as well as the political and economic linchpin of the four-power agreement between the United States, Russia, China, and India. And it would certainly re-stimulate many of our moribund manufacturing industries. It would create many new jobs. It would give a a purpose to our development, but most importantly, it would give people a sense of hope and optimism that something can change for the better rather than the worse, which is what the global-only policies and philosophies have brought us to, which, as you say, is it's an economic collapse. It's economic cannibalism at its worst. Recreating and creating an entirely new paradigm with the Bering Strait Tunnel and the North American Water and Power Alliance and related infrastructure projects, because these have been basically verboten activities under the globalization, free market, free trade system, which of course is what we have to eliminate. And this provides the vehicle by which that can take place, and of course it will definitely have a psychological effect as well as a physical and an economic effect. And I think the oncoming four powers agreement of the United States, Russia, China, and India really becomes the backbone of all this to occur.
Dr. Sergei Cherkasov is a further international expert for such projects. Cherkasov works at the State Geological Vernadsky Museum in Moscow, which is part of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He is a leading expert on questions of raw materials in the scientific tradition of Vladimir Vernadsky and Dmitry Mendeleev, and is active in several international working groups on surveying undiscovered mineral deposits.
We can recollect history of Trans-Siberian Railway construction. We can look at the experience of Baikal-Amur Railroad, of new project Urals Polar, Urals Industrial. But I would rather focus on what we should done to make this project really acting project. First of all, we have to really understand distribution of different resources on the way we are going to build. Without that, it will be like fifth leg for a dog. We have to really understand what will be transported through this railway or infrastructure corridor, either through channel or through bridge. So, first of all, distribution of human resources, of mineral and other resources. Second, first stage actions. I don't want to go into technical complications. Also, there is a lot to say about permafrost, there is a lot to say about mountains on the way. But if we start with healthy thinking, we have a chance to accomplish it healthy. We hear a lot of voices shouting that the resources, mineral resources, are being exhausted. We have to go to the moon. We have to, I don't know, we will die as civilization because of lack of resources. And at the same time, we've explored just a thin film on the surface of the Earth. There is a lot we don't know about the Earth. There is a lot we don't know about the resources. First of all, if we talk about Siberia and about Russian forests, it is a kind of storage room for the whole world. Of course, there are huge resources already known, but at the same time, there are resources that we don't know about yet. And we have many examples when quite interesting mineral deposits or deposits are not being explored, because at the moment it doesn't bring immediate profit. Of course, if we mine something in Africa, the product will be cheaper than if we mine it behind the polar circle. When we talk about resources, it is not just about minerals, about ores. We have quite a complicated distribution of different kind of resources on the Earth. If we look globally on Eurasia, we have high density population in the south. We have nearly zero population in the north. At the same time, we have some mineral resources, forestry in the north, which is needed by the south. But it is not that easy. We just build railway and we get these resources. The problem is some mineral deposits can be mined in such a way, gold deposits, because the product, enriched product takes not a lot of space and not a lot of weight, and it can be taken out by plane. But if we talk less expensive metals, they need deep processing, and they need to process these ores. We need really developed infrastructure.
The development of large land masses must be based on a crash program establishing a sufficient density of basic economic infrastructure. The routes you are seeing on this map of the World Land Bridge are development corridors, about 100-kilometer wide zones with high-speed transportation, roads and railway lines, canals and water management systems, irrigation, power generation and distribution based on the new generation of nuclear power plants, fuel pipelines, fiber optic cables, new agricultural and industrial zones with mining and manufacturing of goods, and new cities and universities. The spine of these development routes is an efficient transportation system capable of quickly moving materials from and to the industries at a low physical cost. Roads are inefficient and easily get jammed up. Transportation on water is slow. Air is expensive. Already rail is by far the best option, and with the implementation of a principle on a higher platform than the wheel, namely magnetic levitation, transportation will enter a new era. Let us say that we wanted to travel from Acapulco on the west coast of Mexico to Mumbai in India. We can do it by ship, or within the newly built worldwide transportation network, we could start our journey from Acapulco's newly built maglev terminal. So far, the Transrapid maglev system has only been built in metropolitan Shanghai, and the Chinese government has planned to extend the line by 180 kilometers to Hangzhou, although this German technology is much more suited to long-distance routes and is also a potential asset in the freight of high-value goods. Today's technology permits us to travel at speeds up to around 500 kilometers per hour, but Chinese and American researchers have shown that, in a near-vacuum tube, a maglev train can reach speeds around 1,000 kilometers per hour. The land route between Acapulco and Mumbai is just slightly longer than the sea route. As our Transrapid train literally flies across the North American continent and through the new tunnel built under the Bering Strait, we realize the great advantage we have compared to our friends that embarked on this ship. While they are stuck in the middle of the ocean not doing much, we are visiting regions that have just recently been developed along the route. The same thing holds for goods transports. Since we are doing it across land, and since every few kilometers of land area is developing new wealth, when we transport goods along a development corridor, we actually generate new wealth along the way. We arrive fast, safe, and well-rested in Mumbai long before the ship. The construction of a maglev line between Acapulco, Mexico, and Mumbai, India, would cost an estimated $800 billion once the Bering Strait Tunnel were finished. If one compares this to the approximately $23 trillion that the United States governments under George W. Bush and now under President Barack Obama have fed to the enemies of humanity at Wall Street and the City of London, then this estimated construction cost becomes negligible. For a maglev line from the Bering Strait via Moscow, Berlin, and Paris to Lisbon, Portugal, would cost around $600 billion, which is only $100 billion more than the bailout packages for the toxic financial waste the state of Germany alone has laid aside for speculators there. The construction of this route from the Bering Strait would be both strategically and economically a revolution, and would give the city of Lisbon a much more beautiful connotation than it has gained with the signing of the abominable Treaty of Lisbon, which has established the bankrupt EU dictatorship over the nations of Europe.
Dear passengers, we are now at Weltlandbrücke station. Please don't forget your belongings. Welcome to take our maglev train again. Thank you.
In close proximity to this main trunk of the Eurasian land bridge, Russia is constructing a new space center called Vostochny, which will play an important role in future exploration and colonization of space by man. As part of the Eurasian land bridge, this space center will become an international nexus for spaceflight. Having already been given the go-ahead by the Russian government, construction is to begin in 2011, and operations are planned to initiate in 2015, when it will serve not only launches into space, but also in production of new rockets, and even to coordinate operations of future interplanetary space stations. Russia has declared its intent to work closely with Japan, China, Europe, and the United States. For the economy of this far eastern area of Russia, construction of this cosmodrome will be a powerful driver, as the necessary new infrastructure will also deal with social problems in the region. New, modern cities will have to be built, in every aspect comfortable to live in, and Russia's population and industrial potential will be mobilized in high gear. Thousands of specialists, and especially young people, will get the possibility to develop their talents working on such ambitious plans for the future. South of the Trans-Siberian Railway lies the Central Asian Desert, where vast transformations in the vein of Nawapa are ripe for implementation. The project to revive the Aral Sea, which was proposed back in the 1940s by the Russian engineer Davidov, has been developed further since that time and has recently been reactivated by Presidents Medvedev of Russia and Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan. The Aral Sea has shrunken dramatically since the 1960s and 70s when, for the purposes of water-intensive, Soviet-planned cotton crops, water from the rivers Amu and Sirdarya were diverted in large amounts. The sea has been drying up at an accelerating rate and has led to the destruction of fishery in the region, and a land strip of about 80 to 300 kilometers around the sea has seen a massive retreat of rainfall and the advent of salt storms. The potential solution to this condition lies many kilometers to the north in the Altai Mountains, where, at the border between Russia, Kazakhstan, China, and Mongolia, the rivers Ob and Irtysh originate. The Siberia-Aral Canal project comprises of damming these rivers where they flow together towards the Arctic, transferring 8% of the water into a reservoir. The Siberian Canal would be carved southward either directly from the reservoir or, after a partial diversion of the Irtysh, from Tobolsk, the birthplace of physical chemist Dmitry Mendeleev. After pumping the water over a series of constructions over the Turgai Divide in northern Kazakhstan and down into the Aral, the canal would extend almost 2,550 kilometers, and the water will have been lifted a total of 90 meters. Beyond the divide, gravity will lead the water past the cities of Turgai, Irgiz, and Kazalinsk, where it will replenish the Aral Sea with Arctic water. This can also be extended directly to Nukus, where forestry and agriculture have also massively retreated. Not only will agriculture again flourish, as 4.5 million hectares of irrigated land become available for agricultural use in Russia and Eurasia, but fishery will also return to this area. Just as with Nawapa in the United States, this process of greening will further influence the climate and biospheric cycles. Continuing along the Eurasian land bridge, we come to Southwest Asia, a hub between Eurasia and Africa, where the impact of the four-power alliance will completely change the life of the people. As this development-driven political shift makes geopolitical manipulations of the British Empire obsolete, the fuel for conflict in this region disappears. The in-depth economic cooperation will make a dialogue of cultures the basis for diplomacy. This spells doom for the ideologies of globalization and Samuel Huntington's clash of civilizations. Hussein Askari is a long-time collaborator of Lyndon LaRouche in Sweden. Over the recent decades, he has worked intensely on the strategic situation in Southwest Asia, and he heads the Arabic desk of Executive Intelligence Review.
The Oasis Plan, as you may know, was presented by Lyndon LaRouche to leaders of Southwest Asia, Arabs as well as Israelis, as a basis for peace based on economic development already in the first half of the 1970s. So this idea not only brings economic development to the nations of the region, but also peace to this very sensitive part of the world strategic situation. If you take a satellite look at the region, or happen to fly over it, you will find an overwhelmingly arid semi-desert or desert area. Vegetation and green areas and population are concentrated on the riverbanks. The survival of the peoples of the region since ancient times, such as Sumer and ancient Egypt, depended upon managing and maintaining the flow of the water from the rivers such as Tigris, Euphrates, and the Nile. In other areas, agriculture is reliant to a great degree on rainfall and underground water. Destruction of water management systems such as canals and dams, combined with long periods of drought, mean death to entire cultures. This brings us to LaRouche's Oasis Plan. Even if we had a stable political situation and a fair and equal distribution of the water resources in the region, the amount of fresh water naturally available in the river systems would not be sufficient to even reach half the average global water consumption per capita. How do we do that? Well, unlike the case with the Nawapa, Plano, or the Transaqua project, there is no fresh water in nearby regions to be transferred to the desert area in Southwest Asia, so to speak. However, this region and North Africa, which suffers from the same problems, are surrounded by seawater. The problem is that these waters are saline and cannot be used either for drinking nor agriculture. Here comes LaRouche's intelligent solution. You bring a large number of small, high-temperature nuclear reactors that could be produced on assembly lines in the United States, Europe, Russia, or Asia. And you place them on the shores of the Gulf, the Mediterranean, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Atlantic. You take the saline water, heat it, and condense the vapor into fresh water. This way, you produce as much water as you have available in the rivers to green the deserts with. New large green areas will help nature cool the local atmosphere and actually increase the possibility of rainfall when clouds pass by these cooler areas. In addition to that, you see the power generated by the nuclear reactors to build modern agro-industrial centers where not only food is grown for the population, but also petroleum resources in the region are used as basic raw materials for petrochemical industries, which raises the value of the petroleum, which otherwise is being used as a simple fuel many times over. The geographical position of Southwest Asia as a crossroad between Asia, Europe, and Africa will give a unique advantage of making the transport cost lower, because it already exists on the main trunk line of the Eurasian-African transport corridors. Of course, LaRouche's Oasis Plan was not limited to water projects, but also proposed building railway and road systems and to connect the countries of the region both together and to the continental neighborhood.
The infrastructural development of Africa is not only a great challenge technically, but it will be the litmus test whether humanity is morally capable of surviving. Africa shouldn't have to take all the steps of 150 years of industrialization that Europe undertook, but should immediately be given access to the most modern technologies which human genius, labor, and engineering have created. And the first issue is an absolutely fundamental one.
The first thing needed, and it seems for somebody who has never been in Africa, something strange, is drinking water. They need drinking water and fresh water for the cleaning, fresh water for all what's needed.
Jacques Cheminade is the head of the French political party Solidarité et Progrès, which works in close collaboration with the worldwide LaRouche movement. Beginning especially with his official campaign for president of France in 1995, he has become well known as a political figure in France and in many other countries. At that time, basing himself on LaRouche's famous forecast of 1994, Cheminade warned against the coming collapse of the derivatives bubble. Cheminade has been a proponent of ending colonialism in Africa for many years. This colonialism exists today in the form of the British Empire's system of globalization, manifesting itself in brutal exploitation and the imposition of so-called wildlife reserves in order to prevent Africa from opening up its own natural resources for development. Today, Cheminade has announced his candidacy for the French presidential elections in 2012.
Lake Chad is in the middle of Africa. It borders Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and obviously Chad, 4 countries. And the Lake Chad pool concerns many, many other countries in Africa. It reaches into Sudan to the east and into Algeria to the north. Lake Chad covered 25,000 square kilometers in 1965, 64, 65. Now, it covers only 2,000, 2,500 square kilometers. And it is a terrible problem because Lake Chad is not very deep. The depth of the lake is between 1 and 8 meters. So, in a tropical weather, in a tropical area, there is evaporation. And if nothing is done about it, there will be no Lake Chad. It will have entirely evaporated by 2020 or 2025. There is another plan that we have developed, we in the Schiller Institute, and this would be to bring the waters from the Ubangi on the Shari-Logon rivers into the Lake Chad. But the water will be taken from outside the Ubangi directly into the Congo pool. This would mean to bring back to the level of 1964-65 the flow of water. We need for that, in addition to the about 15 billion cubic meters per year brought as of now, we know we need 35 to 40 billion cubic meters more. The first thing I mentioned is emergency, and it has to be done now. It has to be done right away, with training on the ground of a new generation of African youth. The Transaqua project plans to bring from the eastern part of the Congo pool 100 billion cubic meters per year, which is a double of what I said before. This would be done through a canal built between Kivu and the Lake Chad. This is 2,400 kilometers of a canal. This canal should be navigable. There should be exchanges of goods along the canal. We would have to plant trees, leaf vegetable. We have to do something to change the weather in that region. Man becoming, like for Nawapa in the United States, an engineer of the biosphere. What's very interesting is that this canal would cross the Lagos-Mombasa axis of African circulation. So at this crossing point of this canal and the Lagos-Mombasa, you can have development of industry. And you need along the canal the development of electricity with dams and also nuclear energy. Then you would have in that area industry. You can have foodstuffs. The transformation of food should be done in Africa. The vegetables and the agricultural production should not export it as such. You can have a wood industry. You can have textile industry. Now Africa imports textiles, which is an aberration. So you need the development of mechanic industry, of course, to train this young generation of Africans into mechanics. So, and you would have also this combination of electricity, industry, and training of a young generation of Africans. That's the key to success. And what we would need, even more probably in Africa than in the United States and Canada, you will need this training of new Africans in a type of CCC operation, training on the ground, step by step, and not bringing everything from outside. So the Transaqua plan would be a regaining of the Africans over the mastery of their land, the mastery of their production, and the mastery also of their weather. That's our concept. And Sudan has absolutely to be brought into this project. It's the youth, the young people trained around the Merowe Dam in Sudan, which should be, so the Baal Ghazal, connected, by the way, to all this Lake Chad project in the Kivu or northern Kivu part of the project. You need a connection between the Sudan development and the development of the Lake Chad. It's a one. They refer to a word in Islam which is very funny, and I don't want to make a mistake. It's istiklaf. It means the mandate from the sky to improve and make the world better. And that will be exactly what will happen for the youth. And they need also to have a sense of the future. Africa, through the colonization, and until present times, has not a sense of the future. People try to survive in the present. And even people having gone to the university or to have done studies. There are a few who have this sense of the future. And these people should be the cradle for the development of Africa.
This program, the World Land Bridge, for the worldwide development of infrastructure corridors, which Helga Zepp-LaRouche initiated in 1990, is today an active policy, especially in many Asian nations, as the governments there are clear on the fact that they can only ever improve their condition by overcoming their lack of development. The increasing cooperation displayed amongst these countries, especially by Russia, China, and India, show that the concept of peace through development is a universally valid principle. Europe has increasingly distanced itself from this inclination, and under the mantras of irrationalities such as high-risk speculation and the anti-human ideology of environmentalism, has embraced the destruction of its physical economy. There is a fraudulent conflict between the free market liberals that have made monetary gain the law and the environmentalists that declare man responsible for the most evil influence on the planet. For both, mankind is a problem they seek to manage. This is an orchestrated game, distracting bystanders and onlookers from the reality and the solutions to the crisis. Were any further proof of principle needed, this can be easily found with the funding of these radical ecological movements. Upon closer inspection, these organizations are far from being the organic, grassroots, friends of the little guy groups that their marketing strategy sells to the people. These groups are in reality funded and logistically supported by the bureaucracy of the European Union and by City of London-based hedge funds, the very same that created the deepening financial crisis. A most active nexus of financing a whole smorgasbord of loud-mouthed environmentalist groups is the European Climate Foundation, ECF. On the executive board of ECF is one Kajo Koch-Weser, vice chairman of Deutsche Bank, and indeed, a large number of giant corporations, banks, and insurance companies see the bubble around green tech as their only next source of major profits. Therefore, they propagate the exact opposite of the biblical idea of be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. They say that man should stop what it has always done, to grow and create new resource bases. However, the majority of the world needs and wants to develop, as we have shown just before. The irony is that a large number of the technologies relevant and even necessary to this development come from Europe. Many of the machine tools, industrial facilities, and other products are regarded worldwide for their high quality and functional innovation. So why are they not being implemented in Europe? The future could be a bright one with unbounded possibilities if we recommit ourselves to technological progress. There is the inherently safe high-temperature nuclear reactor, the full nuclear fuel cycle using fast breeder technology, or flight at zero altitude using maglev. In all these areas and more that are activated by developing the Weltlandbrücke, millions of jobs will be created in Europe. The youth will regain a sense of the future, and welfare systems are made functional. Do we really want time to stop in Europe? Shall Europe become a giant museum whose future as an industrial economy is bleak?
Now, if the world comes out of this crisis, and I can only hope that the vision of how bad it is and how bad it is threatening to become is evoking a power in people that they fight to change it now. You have to stop to be indifferent. If you remain only a person for yourself and say, oh, Africa, I don't care, people in Mexico, I don't care, well, then we are not going to make it. What you have to start cultivating coming out of this conference, if you haven't done it already, is a passion for mankind, a passion for the other. Because only if you have this love for the community of peoples, and I mean all peoples, that we can really unleash the kind of change and movement which is required. Now, what will be the European role in this? Obviously, we have to reject imperialisms of all kinds, above all British imperialism. Well, I think we need a Europe which has national cultures, as Lynn was saying this morning, where the state is catalyzing the creative abilities of all of its citizens because it is the greatest source of wealth also for the economy. Now, European nations have to come back to their senses because it is very clear that we are at a situation where China and India will be the biggest factors in the future. These two countries alone presently already have a population of 2.5 billion. That's more than 1/3, just two nations. And, Lynn has written this beautiful book a couple of years ago, The Next 50 Years on the Planet, where he basically says what has to be the cooperation of, small nations, big nations, nations which have raw materials, nations which have landlocked areas, countries on the seaside. And we have to have this kind of a long-term, multi-level cooperation on joint economic programs like the Eurasian land bridge as the cornerstone for the reconstruction of the world economy, but it has to go together with a renaissance, an emotional change, a cultural renaissance, and people really have to change. People have to value not money, but people have to value their creativity. They have to value a fulfilled life of contributing something immortal to the next generation. And I think we can do it, but you have to help. We all have to work like we never did before, because our job in the next period is to catalyze in Europe the kinds of alliances which will work together with the United States, Russia, China, and India. And then I think there is hope.
It's very clear. It's a funny thing. It's very clear to almost all of our generation that we have no future and that something's very, very wrong with the world in which we live in. But we're in a funny position because we were never taught that there was anything else that could be here besides what we have. So you get this funny thing where you're talking to people in our generation. You tell them, look, you're listening to shit music. You're listening to you're watching terrible movies. You're watching, you ask them, well, why are you doing this? Why are you smoking marijuana? And they get very defensive. And they say, well, look, sometimes I just need to get away. I just need to relax. And you ask them, and they should ask themselves, well, what is it that you need to get away from? You know, what is so wrong? Does it make sense to you that the world should be such that you hate being in it so much that the only way it's tolerable is if you put yourself into a catatonic state? You know, you find something that makes everything entertaining. That all they know is that there's a void there, that there's something missing. They don't know what it is. And so they try to erase their knowledge of it. You create conditions where there's so much noise, there's so much chaos, there's so much just banal entertainment around you that you don't notice. You try to numb yourself to the feeling that something's missing. It doesn't work, and you know, you suffer from that emotionally without knowing what the cause of it is. You know you're missing something, but you don't know what it is, and so you just feel this void. What we've got the chance to do right now is to really make clear what it is that's missing. What's the right of every human being on this planet to connect themselves to an immortal mission that connects them to generations that have never yet to be born and generations that supposedly died long ago, that puts them in a conscious dialogue with all of that, that takes them as an individual and gives them the possibility in their lifetime to transcend time, that puts them in touch with the real sense, the very, very real, literal sense of their own immortality, their immortal existence as a human being. That's what a project like NWAPA means. And you give them a chance to look into the future, to look, you know, decades, you know, but even centuries, millennia, to the extent you can, into the future, at least to see that there's an arc and to realize that their impact, their existence resonates all the way that far, if what they've done with their life matters. If they do something important and meaningful with their life, their existence resonates up to that point, and they can form a mental image of that. That's the right that we're giving back to the youth of the world today.